He was every server's nightmare, a cold, ruthless billionaire no one dared to look straight in the eye. But then, that small, unyielding girl appeared carrying eyes that didn't know how to bow and a heart that didn't know fear. In a fateful moment, she did what no one else dared to do and touched the part of him he thought he had buried forever. The story begins with a single glance and ends with a journey of healing no one ever expected. They called him the Manhattan Dragon. At Beacon and Ivory, one of the most luxurious restaurants in New York, the name Grant Whitmore made every staff member shiver. A financial tycoon notorious not only for his immense wealth, but also for his absolute coldness. He never yelled, never cursed, but each glance, each word from him was enough to make people feel as if they had just been thrown into a freezer. Every Thursday evening, exactly at 7:30, a sleek black Bentley would stop in front of the restaurant. Grant would enter like a gust of icy wind, and the entire place would hold its breath. No one wanted to serve him. Staff dodged, pushed the duty onto others, found excuses to retreat at any cost. There was only one unwritten rule every employee knew by heart. Don't look him in the eye. Don't start a conversation. Don't you dare voice an opinion. But that night, the rule was broken. Meline Carter, 24, had just moved to New York after a string of part-time jobs in Pennsylvania. She had bright brown eyes and hair that fell in soft morning mist tangles. A beauty not loud or showy, but carrying a quiet determination deep within. Meline knew nothing about the Whitmore legend. To her, Beacon and Ivory was an opportunity, a paycheck big enough to cover her mother's heart medication and her younger sister's nursing school tuition at the community college. On her first night, she handled the bar. On the second, she polished crystal glasses in the kitchen. On the third, the manager called her name. Carter, table 6, Whitmore. She froze looking at him. Any special instructions, sir? A male server coughed nervously. The manager only muttered, "Just survive." Meline straightened her apron, drew a deep breath. She had no idea what storm she was about to walk into. As she approached table 6, the air around her seemed to thicken. He was already there. A deep blue suit, black tie, eyes as sharp and cold as a blade, a glass of red wine by his hand. He didn't speak, didn't move. "Good evening, sir. May I offer you the menu?" Medeline's voice was soft, steady. Grant Whitmore turned his head. Those ice-gray eyes swept from head to toe across the young woman. No reply. She didn't bow, didn't step back. She stood tall and waited. A long breath passed. "Leave it." He gestured toward the table. She placed the menu down. "Would you like another glass of wine before ordering, sir?" Grant lifted the glass, sipped slowly. His gaze never left her. "You're new." "Yes, sir. This is my 3rd shift. They send rookies to serve me now. This restaurant must be going downhill." Meline heard every word clearly, but her lips did not tremble. She gave a slight smile. "If anything's sliding downhill, sir, it's only the butter on the toast. And we happen to serve the finest kind." The air seemed to freeze. From afar, a few staff held their breath, eyes wide as plates. Grant Whitmore studied her. He didn't smile, didn't scold, but something strange flickered. "Filet. Medium rare leaning rarer than medium. Sauce on the side. Don't pour it. Separate bowl." "Yes, sir. I'll make sure every detail is as you prefer." She wrote it down. Her back remained straight. No trembling, no retreat. She walked away as if nothing had happened. From the corner, a seasoned waitress whispered, "She has no idea what she just did." When Meline delivered the order to the kitchen, the head chef frowned at the mere mention of Whitmore's name. But she relayed each request clearly, briefly, precisely. No embellishments, no complaints. When she returned, the dinner was served with flawless detail. Grant ate in silence. No praise, no criticism. But after signing the bill, he left, a tip 5 times the standard amount. On the receipt beneath his signature, Grant wrote just 2 words, "For endurance." That night, everyone looked at Meline differently. She was no longer the newbie. She had survived the first fire and even forced the Manhattan Dragon to release a strange flicker of flame acknowledgement. But for her, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like a question. Who was he really? Meline was not the type to scare easily. But that night when she returned to her small apartment in Brooklyn, her hands were still trembling slightly. She opened the cabinet and pulled out the glass jar of savings, the fund where every tip she earned was split between paying for her mother's heart medication and covering her sister Clara's nursing tuition at the community college. Tonight, the amount had suddenly jumped, because of a man everyone at the restaurant wanted to avoid. Grant Whitmore. They called him a monster. But when he wrote for endurance on that bill, she glimpsed something not a threat but a sign, a warning, or some other signal. The next day in the staff lounge, the air buzzed with speculation. He really left you a tip. I served him for 2 years, never saw more than 10%. Did you accidentally hit some nerve of his? Meline only shook her head, keeping quiet. But the manager, who carried himself with the weight of experience, stepped forward. Carter, we need to talk. The lounge was small and stifling, the wall clock ticking like a heartbeat of tension. I thought you understood the rules. No interaction, no jokes, no pushback. The manager's voice sank lower. I wasn't joking, and I wasn't disrespectful. Madeline's gaze did not falter. A nearby waitress cut in. You don't get it. Whitmore isn't normal. Once a new server just smirked at the wine he ordered. The next day his father was fired from a company Whitmore had invested in. We can't prove it, but everyone knows it wasn't coincidence. Silence filled the room. Then the manager spoke again, this time not as a threat, but as a sigh, long and heavy. He wasn't always like this. Once he was a gentle father, a man with a beautiful wife, a little daughter. Then came the accident. His voice cracked slightly at that word. A drunk driver ran a red light. His wife's car was hit head-on. Both his wife and daughter killed instantly. The girl was only 7 years old. The driver had a good lawyer, got probation, lost his license for a year. That's it. Meline sat frozen. She thought of her own mother, still gasping for breath each night. Thought of Clara, her younger sister, who still believed everything would turn out fine. If she lost them, would she become like Grant Whitmore? The manager's voice softened. He doesn't need money, doesn't need fame. All he needs is control over the only thing he has left: dinner. A miniature perfect world, where every detail from the temperature of the wine to the fold of the napkin is his decision. Meline didn't respond, but her eyes had changed. From that day, Grant was no longer just a cold monument to avoid. In her eyes, he was a fortress, one that had already crumbled desperately, trying to hold its last stones in place. The following Thursday night, Meline was assigned to table 6 again. No one said a word, but everyone watched. Grant Whitmore was already seated. His gaze met hers, not sharp as steel this time, but like a sigh carried in his eyes. She didn't speak. He didn't either. He simply slid a small folded note across the menu. On it, in neat handwriting, were the words, Scotch, neat, served by Meline Carter. For the first time she saw his handwriting, neat, firm. She looked up. Their eyes met. And then something that hadn't happened in weeks happened. His voice rumbled low and concise. Meline, not Waitress, not the new girl. Her name. Filet mignon, same as before. Yes, sir. Her reply was light but warm. As she walked away, her steps stayed calm, steady as ever. But inside, a quiet storm stirred, not out of fear, but from the feeling she had just stepped into a nameless game. A game between two souls, one frozen by loss, the other burning with refusal to surrender. By the third week, no one was surprised anymore when Meline was once again assigned to serve Grant Whitmore's table. But this time, there were no more pitying looks, no more whispered warnings. Instead, there was something almost like anticipation, as if they were watching a strange play unfold with Meline and the restaurant's dragon as the leads. The moment he entered, he made his first demand. I want my water glass replaced every time it's less than half full. Meline raised a brow slightly but nodded. Of course, sir. I'll keep an eye on every drop. The second demand came right after the appetizer. I don't want to hear the sound of cutlery clashing from any other table. If I do have the kitchen replace their utensils. Meline let out a soft breath. Not from weariness, but from understanding. These weren't mere demands. This was a chess match. And once again she accepted the game. Instead of causing chaos in the kitchen or making unreasonable requests of other guests, she walked calmly to Chef Hayden. Chef, there's a small request tonight, from table 6. Don't tell me he wants me to change the silverware for the entire restaurant. Not necessary. Just let me borrow a long velvet runner. I'll handle the rest. Meline folded the velvet cloth neatly and circled discreetly around table 6, moving as if adjusting the decor. She tucked it lightly beneath the plates and cutlery of the nearest table, then whispered to another server. Please remind the guests at table 5 to handle their utensils a little more gently. Say there's a business meeting nearby. No fuss, no kitchen drama. Most importantly, no one felt offended. In the kitchen, Chef Hayden scowled. You're telling me he wants his steak cooked rarer than medium, but if there's any pink, he'll send it back. Exactly. What do you expect me to do? Work magic. Just prepare it as you always do, but keep the sauce separate. He wants to control the final detail. Hayden muttered something about eccentric rich men, but followed every instruction. When the dish was served, Grant only gave the slightest nod. No praise, no complaint. But for the second time, he left a tip far above standard. No note, no glance. Only silence heavy deliberate. In the following weeks, each dinner with Grant brought a new challenge. Once he requested fish grilled only over wood fire and demanded his back be turned while it was served. Another time he asked Meline to read the menu aloud, in French. And one evening, he demanded that not a single flower be placed in the restaurant because the scent interferes with the palate. Every time, Meline didn't grumble, didn't resist. She simply executed and did it well. But something strange began to happen. Grant too started to change, though slowly. He no longer issued commands as if ruling a kingdom. Sometimes his eyes hesitated before he spoke, and at times, when he looked at Meline, it wasn't the gaze of a customer towards staff, but the appraisal of a rival he was beginning to respect. By the 8th week after a series of quiet dinners, Grant finally asked, "Why do you never ask why?" Meline, mid-pour of water, paused in the air. "Why should I? Because I know my requests are unreasonable. You're not curious." She set the pitcher down, calm but firm. "I think everyone has their own reason for controlling the world around them. Maybe because inside there's a place where they can't control anything at all." A heavy silence fell. Grant didn't reply, but his gaze lingered on her for a very long time. That night he didn't leave a tip. Not out of dissatisfaction, but as if money was no longer the right language for what he wanted to say. Instead, he left a plain brown envelope, nameless, unmarked, like a drifting leaf, meant only for her to find. Inside was an old photograph, a younger Grant, holding a little curly-haired girl tightly in the middle of an autumn park blazing with golden leaves. Both of them smiling radiantly, a smile that had never crossed his face in the present. No message, only a number written in the corner in his steady hand, 2012. Meline told no one. She understood immediately. This was no longer a test. This was a door cracked open not with words, but with memory. From that moment, she knew she was no longer just a waitress enduring a chess match. She had become the first person Grant trusted enough to share his pain through the most vulnerable part of him, a beautiful memory. Rain poured over New York on the 9th Thursday night as Meline pushed through the revolving doors of Beacon and Ivory, clutching her small umbrella, dripping with icy water. The air outside was chilly, but what weighed inside her chest was a restless unease she couldn't quite name. Something was changing. She felt it not only in Grant's eyes, not only in the subtle shifts in his body language, but in the racing beat of her own heart whenever she approached table 6. That night, Grant was already seated before she arrived. A glass of water, not scotch, waited on the table. That had never happened before. "Good evening, Mr. Whitmore." Meline smiled softly. He only gave a nod. He didn't issue his usual demands right away. A silence stretched. Then he said, "I'll start with scallops, but they must be seared exactly 1 minute per side." She noted it carefully as always. "Braised spinach, but it must not touch the scallops. There must be a clear gap between them." A strange request, but it no longer surprised her. "Yes, sir." Then he lifted his head slowly. "And water, an unopened bottle, 3 slices of lemon, no more, no less. Ice on the side. I'll mix it myself." As she turned away, a smile flickered faintly across her lips. The game was back again. Not about power, not about control, but more like a ritual, a private language shared between 2 lost souls. In the kitchen, Chef Hayden raised a brow at the scallop request. 1 minute per side. I don't cook with a stopwatch." "I'll do it." Meline lifted her watch. "I'll count." "And what else?" "The gap between the spinach and the scallops." "For heaven's sake! Does he want me to build a wall between seafood and vegetables?" "That's exactly what he wants." Hayden groaned, running a hand through his hair. But he still did it. Because if Meline asked, there was always a reason. She returned to the table with a silver tray carrying a dish plated like a miniature opera stage, 3 perfectly seared scallops resting on white porcelain, facing a mound of vibrant green spinach, divided by a stark line of empty plate. "Your scallops, sir, with braised spinach, and the proper distance." Her voice carried a tiny playful smile. Grant looked at the dish, then at her. No smile, but his eyes softened ever so slightly. She withdrew to tend other tables, but as she passed him again, she heard his low voice. "Madeline." She turned. "Sit, just for a moment." Her heart stumbled, but she obeyed. "I won't ask why." Grant gave a slow nod. "And I won't explain." Both fell silent, gazing out through the glass windows, where rain traced racing lines down the pane. The city outside blurred into a watercolor painting. "Have you ever lost someone?" His question came suddenly. Madeline bit her lower lip. "I'm about to lose my mother," she whispered. He nodded once. "It's a pain without words. People think you get used to it. You don't. Every morning, it's learning to breathe all over again." She said nothing, only looked at him, and she realized for the first time Grant Whitmore was lowering the mask. Just then, her apron pocket buzzed. A call from her sister Clara. Madeline excused herself. "Sir, may I step away just for a minute? It's my sister." Grant gave a small nod, no questions asked. She slipped into the side hall down a narrow corridor toward the staff emergency exit, a place rarely used during peak hours. Dim fluorescent light hummed above rain, tapping against the scratched glass window. She pressed accept. Clara's trembling voice spilled out. "Sis, bad news. I just spoke with the doctor." "What is it?" "There's a new treatment. It could help restore some of Mom's heart function. But the cost, nearly $40,000. Madeline could barely breathe. "Insurance won't cover it. They said it's still experimental." "Clara, don't tell Mom. I'll handle it. But how? I'll find a way, I promise." She ended the call. Her eyes blurred, her chest ached. And then, she realized, at the far end of the hall, just a few yards away, but hidden partly behind a wooden column, Grant Whitmore was standing, motionless, silent. The cold backlight cast his shadow long across the tiles. He didn't step forward, didn't offer comfort, didn't say a word. He only leaned against the wall, as if he had been there all along. The overhead light spilled a dull glow across his shoulders. Madeline froze. He had heard, not because he wanted to, but because fate had made him witness a moment eerily familiar. And still he did not move closer. No consolations, no intrusion, only silence heavy, immovable like a ghost from the past awakened in him. When she returned to the table, the water glass sat untouched, the meal still waiting. The eyes that met hers then, they weren't the eyes of a demanding patron. They were the eyes of someone who had once lost everything and had just seen another version of himself reflected in someone else. He said nothing, didn't look at her differently, didn't feign pity. He simply finished his meal quietly, then ordered a fresh cup of coffee, black hot, freshly brewed. When he left, the bill lay on the table as usual, but this time, the tip was double the cost of the meal. No message, no mark, only a silent response the same way he had always faced his grief. 2 days after that rain-soaked phone call, Madeline was at home, her small Brooklyn apartment bathed in the gray light of a New York afternoon, when the phone rang. An unfamiliar number, Midtown area code. "May I speak with Madeline Carter?" "Yes, this is she." "My name is Evelyn McAllister, senior attorney at McAllister and Reed. We've been retained by an anonymous third party to provide legal support for your mother in her dispute with the insurance company." Madeline froze. I never contacted your firm." "We know. The sponsor requested complete anonymity, but they presented your mother's case and asked us to review her file. We've found signs of unlawful denial on the insurance company's part. Your initial consultation will be free. All subsequent legal expenses have already been covered." Madeline's heart pounded against her ribs. Her fingers clutched the phone like a lifeline. Part of her wanted to ask, who why? But the other part, the intuition of someone who had lived balanced between loss and hope, already knew the answer. Thursday night came again. Beacon and ivory gleamed as always, but to Madeline every chandelier seemed dimmer. Her pulse was uneven as she set the menu on table 6. Grant sat there as silent and immovable as granite. She poured his water. She didn't ask for his order, and then he spoke. "In this world, Carter," he said, eyes still fixed away, "every system is designed to crush the weak. Complicated procedures, intentional. Fine print, like ants, intentional." She stood still, struggling to keep her hands steady. He turned his head, then his eyes no longer knives, but a deep, restless sea. When someone gives you a tool to break that game, use it. Don't thank them. That was confirmation. No need to name it, no need to admit it. He was the hidden benefactor. That night after her shift, Madeline didn't go straight home. She sat in a cafe near the park, opened her laptop, and began to search. Not about the lawyers, about him. Grant Whitmore, the first page Forbes, the coldest man on Wall Street. The second Bloomberg, the master of control. The third New York Post, Billionaire, reappears after a decade in seclusion. She skimmed them all. Nothing new, just the mask. So she searched differently. Whitmore Plus Scholarship Fund. Whitmore Fewis Victims' Rights. Whitmore Pewis Anonymous Foundation. A tiny mention on a legal blog. An organization called Legacy Hearts, funded by an anonymous benefactor providing free attorneys for families denied medical coverage. The funding list anonymous sponsor since 2012. Madeline's heart raced. 2012, the same year, the accident was recorded in the public files, the crash that killed his wife and daughter. She kept digging. A scholarship named the Ellen E. Whitmore Foundation, quietly funding law students who pursued victims' rights cases for a decade. A proposed bill called Eleanor's Law, tightening penalties for drunk drivers who caused fatal accidents. Its backers, a small advocacy group funded by an unnamed source. Piece by piece, the puzzle wove itself together. He wasn't angry out of selfishness. He clung to control because he had once lost everything. And he helped others silently because he no longer believed in the light. Meline closed the laptop. The city was hushed beyond her window, but inside her, a wave had risen. He wasn't just the dragon of Beacon and Ivory. He was a man building bridges brick by brick, with memory cemented with compassion, unseen by the world. Until now. The following week, when Grant began to order, he stopped halfway. "I'll have the..." "No, you choose." Meline froze. "Me, just this once." She chose steamed white cod with green peppercorn sauce, her childhood favorite, a dish her mother made on rare days when she felt strong enough to cook. When it was served, Grant said nothing. But he finished every bite. No requests for adjustments, no complaints. Only a look, softened like ice breaking at the turn of spring. On the bill in his precise hand were 3 words. "You kept going." Meline folded the slip carefully, tucking it away in her drawer. It wasn't praise. It wasn't a reward. It was recognition. And perhaps a silent nod from a shattered heart to another learning to stand firm. New York was shifting into autumn. Trees along Bleecker Street were turning gold, and the air carried a crispness that seeped into every corner of the city. But inside, Beacon and Ivory warmth lingered at least at table 6. Meline was no longer the new girl. She had become part of the ritual, the leading role in a silent play that no one else dared perform, alongside Grant Whitmore. That evening when Grant arrived, he didn't stride in as usual. He paused a moment at the glass door, as if to study his own reflection. Then, seated at his familiar table, he didn't issue demands right away. Only a look, and a short question. "What's special tonight?" Meline blinked, half wondering if she'd misheard. "I think the rosemary-crusted lamb would suit the weather perfectly." He nodded. "Fine, but one condition. Of course, make sure it's real." The words were odd, but she understood. He wasn't just talking about the dish. As she walked away, her heart beat strangely fast. It had been weeks since that fateful phone call. Weeks since Grant had revealed himself as the anonymous benefactor who gave her mother a chance at treatment. McAllister and Reed hadn't only sued the insurance company, they had uncovered flaws in her mother's original diagnosis, opening the door to a malpractice case. Negotiations were underway for a settlement large enough to fund long-term care. Meline didn't have to beg banks for loans, didn't have to juggle 3 jobs. Most importantly, her mother had begun to smile again. That night, after serving the main course, Meline returned with a pot of Earl Grey. Not just any pot, but one crafted differently than before. Grant had once dismissed it. The tea is weak. Weak tea makes a weak will. This time, she steeped it exactly 3 minutes, added a twist of orange peel and a drop of wild honey. She set the cup before him. "A surprise, sir. Not on the menu, but worth trying." Grant lifted the cup, inhaled, sipped. He said nothing, just set it down. Acceptable. From him, that was the highest form of praise. Later, as the restaurant quieted with only the piano lingering softly in the background, Meline decided to break the rules. Not to destroy them, but to open a path. She stood near his table, her hand resting lightly on the order book. "Mr. Whitmore." "Call me Grant," he interrupted without turning his head. She took a deep breath. "I know about the scholarships, the legal aid, the anonymous donations, and Eleanor's Law." He didn't answer, didn't look at her, but his shoulders tightened. "I've read, I've seen, and I know it was you." After a long pause, he turned. The The golden light fell across his face, no longer the frozen mask everyone else saw, but the real man beneath. A man exhausted from hiding what he had lost. No one knows that. I'm not just anyone, Meline said softly. He looked away toward the window, where autumn leaves swirled in the wind. His voice dropped low and fractured. I couldn't save them, couldn't keep my family, but I can help someone else escape that pain, even if it's only one person. Meline stayed silent. She didn't rush to comfort, didn't interrupt. She simply stood there, the one person brave enough to remain, when he set down the shield. Moments later, Grant looked back up. I'm creating a formal foundation, a transparent fund. No more hiding, no more working in the shadows. I need someone to run it, someone who understands loss, someone who isn't afraid of silence. His eyes locked on hers. I need you, Meline. She went still. That invitation wasn't just a job. It was trust, the key to the deepest part of who he was. Meline looked around the restaurant. The chandeliers glittered, voices murmured, glasses sparkled the world she had known until now. But a new door had opened, a world where loss could turn into strength, a world where hidden kindness could be called by its true name. She nodded as if in prayer. I'm ready. Medeline's first day as executive director of the Whitmore Foundation did not begin in a glass-walled skyscraper office with a gleaming nameplate like in the movies. It began on a Monday morning in a modest room inside an old building near Union Square, where exposed brick walls and paper files still outnumbered computers. No ribbon cutting, no speeches, just Grant standing before a corkboard crowded with pinned notes, coffee cup in hand, his eyes fixed on every detail. I didn't build this to show off. I want an ecosystem of support, fast, discreet, efficient, he said, without turning. Meline stepped forward holding a folder she had stayed up late reviewing the night before. I've gone through our old legal partners, from the anonymous funds. Some attorneys are willing to come back now that the funding source is public. Grant nodded. Good. Trust is something we don't have much of. We'll have to build it piece by piece. The following week spun like a wheel that never stopped. Meline met with medical advisors, reviewed case files for families denied coverage. She called universities reinstating old scholarships. She personally approved new cases, a single mother battling cancer, a little boy with a rare disorder whose insurance claimed there wasn't enough clinical evidence. Every face, every story was another reason she couldn't stop. One afternoon after leaving a meeting with the advisory team, Meline passed Grant's office. The door was ajar. He sat alone, his hand not on the keyboard, but on a photograph, the same one she had once found in that plain envelope, a younger Grant, his radiant wife, his little girl laughing in his arms. She almost walked past, but his voice broke the silence. I once thought this world had nothing left to give me, he said, still staring at the photo. And then you walked in carrying light, not because you tried, but because you weren't afraid of the dark. Meline stepped inside, gently closing the door. You told me once the system was built to crush the weak. Now we're building another one. A system where the weak don't have to beg for mercy, they have the right to fight. Grant looked up, and for the first time he smiled. Not forced, not guarded. A real smile. News of the Whitmore Foundation spread quickly. A once reclusive billionaire infamous for his coldness was now publicly running a non-profit providing legal aid, medical support, and scholarships to those left behind by the system. People doubted. People gossiped, but for the mothers who slept easier because their children's medicine was covered for the families who received acceptance letters instead of rejection, none of that mattered. What mattered was that someone was finally on their side. One Thursday evening, months after Meline had left the Beacon in Ivory, she returned, not as a server, as a guest. She walked in wearing a simple, elegant forest green dress. The new staff didn't recognize her, but a few veterans rose from their seats in shock. Brenda, the waitress who had once warned her about the monster, ran over and embraced her like a hero returned. So it's true, Brenda whispered. Meline only smiled. You were right. He's not ordinary. She was led to table 6, the familiar place, where stories had begun in silence and ended in the deepest of changes. Grant was already there, a glass of water before him, neat. No, ice 3, lemon slices, napkin folded square. You're 4 minutes late. I've learned something from you, she replied as she sat down. Precision. Grant slid the menu across to her. Tonight you choose. Scallops. No need to separate them from the spinach. He let out the faintest chuckle. Under the chandeliers and soft piano notes, they shared a meal not as employer and staff, not as the powerful and the powerless, but as two people both broken once, both scarred, now building something worth believing in. She looked at him, her eyes steady. "You saved my mother, but more than that, you saved yourself." Grant gave a quiet nod. "You didn't just endure. You pulled me out of the hole I thought I'd live in forever." A beautiful silence fell between them, and then words as gentle as spring wind carrying the weight of an entire journey. "We're starting a new chapter, Meline. No one has to endure alone anymore." A year had passed since the night Meline Carter first stepped into Beacon and Ivory, completely unaware she was about to face a man who would change her life and whom she, in turn, would change just as deeply. A year since the first time she looked straight into Grant Whitmore's ice-gray eyes and refused to bow. Now, inside the main office of the Whitmore Foundation, on the 15th floor of a modest Flatiron building, Meline sat before a wall covered in pinned letters, handwritten notes, some crooked, some barely legible, from families who once thought they had reached the end of the road. "Because of you, my daughter received surgery. I never thought anyone would stand with me against the insurance company until your call came. My husband died of cancer, and I thought I would lose the house too. Then a check arrived, no name attached. I know it was you." They didn't know the founder of the foundation had once been a ghostly figure haunting the most luxurious dining room in the city. They didn't know the director had once been a quiet waitress just trying to buy medicine for her mother. But none of that mattered. What mattered was this trust had been reborn. One early winter morning, as the city lay beneath a light coat of snow, Grant entered the office without warning. Gone was the usual dark overcoat. He wore a gray turtleneck sweater instead, appearing almost gentler. The sharpness that once clung to him had given way to a steady calm. "Today marks 1 year, you know," he said, placing a small box on her desk. Meline nodded, smiling softly. "I couldn't forget." She opened the box. Inside lay a hand-carved wooden plaque. "The Carter Room, for those who refuse to break." Her throat tightened, not because her name was on it, but because the message was his, and now he had chosen to share it with the world. That afternoon, they visited one of the Foundation's first funded projects, a counseling center for children who had lost parents in traffic accidents. The first child to run up and hug Meline was Lily, 7 years old, curly-haired, bright-eyed. Her mother had just received enough support to continue therapy for both of them after the crash that had taken Lily's father. Meline held her close. She glanced at Grant, standing a few steps away, eyes following the girl as if he were seeing a shadow from his own past. That evening, they returned to Beacon and Ivory, no longer a battlefield, but the place where it all began. Grant ordered a meal, with no extra conditions. No separate ice, no precisely 3 lemon slices, just dinner. When Meline reached for the wine, he gently placed his hand over the bottle and said, "Allow me." He poured 2 glasses, one for her, one for himself. They clinked their glasses, needing no more words. On their way out, a young server ran after Meline. "Miss Carter, I just want to say, I heard your story. I lost my mom to illness too, and I just want to thank you for giving people like us someone to believe in." Meline didn't answer right away. She placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "Sometimes the good begins with refusing to step back, even if it's just the right words at the right time, or meeting someone's eyes without lowering your own." Outside, snow fell in silence. Grant walked slowly beside her, no longer needing to lead, no longer hiding behind frost. Now he was simply a man learning to walk again, beside a woman who had helped him find himself. In a world loud and chaotic, where people often saw only masks, the story of Meline and Grant was a quiet but profound reminder. Sometimes all it takes is standing tall when the world wants you to kneel, and miracles will begin from that very moment. There are stories that don't need grand climaxes, don't need miracles, don't even need a love that clings to life and death. They need only one thing: the truth of the human heart. And the truth in Meline Carter and Grant Whitmore's story was not in expensive meals or shocking tips. It was in the eyes of a young woman who refused to look away, who dared to face a soul thought to be carved in stone, and saw not a monster, but a man who had lost too much to know how to speak again. Grant did not need saving. He only needed someone not to run when faced with his wounds. And Meline, she never tried to save him. She simply stood firm, stayed present, and in doing so, changed everything. They did not become lovers. They needed no embraces or promises. They never whispered forever over wine. Because love doesn't always wear the shape of romance. Sometimes it is trust reborn. Sometimes it is a hand that doesn't pull away when touching another's scars. Sometimes it is endurance when the world begs you to give up. So, if you have ever felt small, if you have ever faced a world harsher than you thought you could bear, remember this. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is moving forward even while fear still lingers. Thank you for staying until the end of this story. And if your heart stirred, if a face came to mind someone who stayed when you wanted to walk away, share this story. Because perhaps what you spread today is exactly what someone else needs to keep from breaking. And if you too believe that this world still holds stories worth trusting, worth remembering, worth telling, subscribe so we can meet again in the next one, where hearts once shattered will learn to beat together again.